opposition. Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Divisions between Ukraine and the US only serve Vladimir Putin. President Zelenskyy is right to try and rebuild his relationship with President Trump. He is keeping a cool head under very difficult circumstances, and I was glad to see President Trump receive his letter positively. What is the Prime Minister doing to help rebuild their relationship after a challenging week?
Minister.
Well, she's absolutely right that we need to do everything we can to ensure that the US, Europe and Ukraine are working together on lasting peace. And I'm doing everything I can to play my part in that, in regular contact with all of the key players at the moment, including talking to President Zelenskyy yesterday afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for that answer. All of us in this House know that the British Armed Forces are a huge source of pride to our country. They put themselves in harm's way to defend our values. As the opposition, we support efforts to resolve this conflict, but we cannot write a blank cheque. If British peacekeeping troops in Ukraine were attacked, whether directly or via proxies, we could be drawn into conflict with Russia. Can the Prime Minister reassure all those who are concerned about the UK being drawn into war?
Minister.
Yes, that's the last thing anybody wants to see. And the whole point of ensuring that there's a lasting peace and that any deal, if there's a deal, is defended, is to avoid conflict, to ensure that we do have peace. The way to ensure we have peace is to ensure there are guarantees for any deal that is in place, because the surest risk that there will be conflict is if Putin thinks that he can breach any deal that may be arrived at.
The Prime Minister is quite right, and we on this side of the House agree with him. The objective for his visit to Washington was to get that US security guarantee for Ukraine, and I commend his efforts in this very difficult task. But nonetheless, on Monday, the United States withdrew military aid for Ukraine. Can he update the House on the steps he is taking to persuade America that it is also in their national interest to provide a security guarantee?
Prime Minister.
I'm pleased to inform the House that on Thursday of last week we did discuss security guarantees. The President made absolutely clear his commitment to Article 5 of NATO, absolutely clear that he would have our backs because of the relationship between our parties, and agreed that our teams would sit down together to talk through security guarantees. I've spoken to him, I think, 3 times since then on the telephone, because it is vitally important that we work with the US, with Europe and Ukraine and make sure that if there is a deal, it has proper security guarantees in place.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister is not able to comment on specific intelligence matters, and I'm certainly not asking him to do that. However, there are concerning reports that the United States has instructed Britain to suspend intelligence sharing with Ukraine, and other reports that Five Eyes itself may be at risk. We need to make sure America does not disengage. There are some in this House who argue Europe should go it alone. But does he agree with me that without this country's greatest ally, any peace agreement would place a terrible burden on Britain and our taxpayers?
Prime Minister.
Well, I do agree with her wholeheartedly, and that's why in the debate we had just 2 days ago, I've always been clear that we need to ensure that the US, the UK, Europe and Ukraine are working together, but we must not choose between the US and Europe. We never have historically, and we're not going to do so now.
Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his comments on that. He will know that it is not just the security situation that worries people. They are also concerned about trade wars and the economic impact of tariffs like those levelled on Canada and Mexico yesterday. The best way to avoid America putting tariffs on Britain is to reach agreement on a US trade deal. Following the Prime Minister's trip to Washington, have talks on a UK-US trade deal begun?
Prime Minister.
Well, I was pleased in the meeting I had last week that we did discuss an economic deal and agreed that our teams would indeed sit down rapidly to talk through an economic deal, and that is what they're doing, because, as she rightly says, that is far better than getting drawn into conflict in relation to tariffs.
Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad the Prime Minister has confirmed that those talks have started. People across our country are worried. They're worried about national security. They're worried about whether we can equip our military fast enough. They are worried about whether we will deploy troops in Ukraine and whether we will be able to keep the peace. They are also worried about our economic security. Can we afford all this? The world is changing fast, and we need an entirely new approach to our economy and our energy security. The budget last year halted growth with higher taxes and higher borrowing. Yesterday, farmers were protesting in Whitehall again. People are hurting. Will he now change course so we can have the economic security we know we need for our national security?